Okay, I've got a table here, number and origin of clamshell tools found at different levels below the surface in caves at different depths, and collected from the beach and collected from the sea floor. Okay, it doesn't look too hard to read. Let's read what's going on here. This is command of evidence, and it looks like we're going to have to support the team's conclusion. Let's find out what that is and what's going on. Studying tools unearthed at a cave site in the western part of Italy, archaeologists Via and colleagues have determined that prehistoric Neanderthal groups fashioned them from shells of clams that they harvested from the seafloor, while wading or diving, or that washed up on the beach. Okay, so they built tools from clamshells. Okay, clamshells become thin and eroded as they washed up on the beach, while those on the seafloor are smooth and sturdy. So the research team suspect that Neanderthals prized the tools made with seafloor shells. Okay. However, the team also concluded that those tools were likely more challenging to obtain, noting that. Okay, so what do we have here? We've got shells that are made into tools, old tools, and I guess they're sort of sharp and can be sharpened up, so that kind of makes sense. And they prefer the ones that can come from the sea floor, so they prefer these. These are better. Okay. Than the other ones. The only problem is they're also harder to get. Okay. So we want to see what evidence here shows that it's harder. Is that what's going on here to get from the seafloor? Right away we see at the given depths, oddly numbered here. I don't know why they start with 3 to 4. Well, maybe because that's the most popular, but still it's not in order. You get a lot more shells from the beach. So they're definitely more here. They're less here, which suggests, yes, that's harder. Okay. And these would be the ones that can make better tools. Okay. So, however, the team also concluded that those tools were likely more challenging to obtain, noting that, okay, so what evidence here? At each depth below the surface in the cave, the difference in the numbers of tools of each type suggests that shells were easier to collect from the beach than to harvest from the seafloor. So at each depth, so across the rows, essentially, the difference in the number of tools, yeah, there are more tools here, right? At each depth. That suggests that the shells were easier to collect from the beach than to harvest from the seafloor. Yeah, I think so. I think that's what the table is telling us. I'm going to soft circle A. Let's look at the other answer choices. The highest number of tools were at a depth of 3 to 4 meters below the surface, which suggests that the Neanderthal population of the site was highest during the related... What? No, this table says nothing about the Neanderthal population at the site. That is not in the table, so it's not accurate to the table. The table says nothing about that. Okay. C, at each depth below the surface in the cave, the difference in the numbers of tools of each type suggests that Neanderthals preferred to use clamshells from the beach because of their durability. No, it doesn't. The fact that there are more numbers is not because they prefer them. In fact, they stated in our premises that the ones from the seafloor are better. So they didn't prefer the ones that weren't better. That's not accurate. I mean, it is accurate. The numbers are that way, but it's not relevant to the question. It's mixing up the facts and ideas. D, the higher number of tools at depths of 5 to 6 meters below the surface in the cave than at 4 to 5 below the surface suggests the size of clam populations changed over time. No, that is clearly not relevant to what we care about here. A is the correct answer. Okay, I've got another table. This is a command of evidence, and it's going to be a support the argument or the conclusion in this case. Let's see, nucleo-based concentrations of Murchison meteorite soil samples, sample 1, sample 2, Murchison soil sample. So I have 2 meteorites samples, a soil sample, and different nucleobases. A lot of words I don't know here, but let's start and see what this is about, what the conclusion is. Employing high-performance liquid chromatography, a process that uses pressurized water to separate material into its component molecules, astrochemists Yoshiro Oba and colleagues analyzed 2 samples from the Murchison meteorite that landed in Australia, as well as from soil from the landing zone. Okay, so the meteorite, 2 samples, and the soil, thus our 3 columns. To determine the concentrations of various organic molecules by comparing the relative concentrations of types of molecules known as nucleobases in the Murchison meteorite with those in the soil, the team concluded there is evidence that the nucleobases in the Murchison meteorite formed in space and are not the result of contamination on Earth. So if they were contamination from Earth, we'd look like the soil sample, I would guess, but somehow they're going to be sufficiently different. So we see these are in the meteorite samples with positive values, not at all in the soil sample, okay? And we see these are significantly different numbers than in the soil sample. So this suggests, yes, that certainly there are different amounts, and some of them almost don't even exist in soil, but they exist in abundance in the meteorites. So with the exception of sort of adenine, all of these nucleobases appear only in the meteorites, essentially, and not in soil. I think that's going to be our best evidence. Let's see what the answer choices are. Isoguanine and purine were detected in both meteorite samples, but not in the soil sample. Well, yeah, they were. Now, their amounts were relatively small, so that seems to be in the right direction. Let's keep going. Adenine and xanthine were detected in both of the meteorite samples and in the soil. The fact that they're detected in both does not help prove our point that the meteorite was different. They could have just actually been contaminated and mixed up in that case, so that's wrong. C, hypaxanine and purine were detected in both the Murchison meteorite 2 sample and in the soil sample. So the fact that it's in this sample 2, I don't think that's sufficient evidence, right? So it's in sample 2, and by the way, it's not that much in sample 2. And it's not that much in the soil. So that doesn't look really any different. That's not going to prove our case that the meteorites are sufficiently different. Isoguanine and hypoxanine were detected in the Murchison meteorite sample 1, but not in sample 2. That is just not accurate, right? Isoguanine and purine were in samples 1 and 2. Very different amounts, but to say they were not detected is wrong. So actually, A is going to be our best answer. It's true to the table, and it supports or is relevant to the claim. Okay, let's see. I've got a column chart with 3 different bars, and the percentage of Ondo State small-scale farmers who are female by main crop grown. Okay, female farmers, percentage of total, and we've got, looks like 3 different regions, north, central, south, and the type of crops are cereals, roots, crops, non-root vegetables. It doesn't look a little complicated, but not very complicated. Let's read what's going on. This is going to be a logically complete. So let's read and kind of put together our logic here. What's happening? Geographer so-and-so and his colleagues surveyed small-scale farmers in 3 locations in Ondo State, Nigeria, which has mountainous terrain in the north, an urbanized center and coastal terrain in the south, to learn more about their practices like the types of crops they mainly cultivated. In some regions, female farmers were found to be especially prominent in the cultivation of specific types of crops. So females were especially prominent. So they probably had a high percentage of the total of that particular crop. So we'll look at high bars there, basically. In the cultivation of specific types, and even constituted the majority of farmers who cultivated those crops. So for instance, so we probably want an example of where they're a majority. And I can quickly go up with the table and see anything above 50% is a majority. So it's probably going to be for the dark bars, which is non-root vegetables. Females in North and South Ondo were the majority. So I don't know, let's check the answer choice, see which one's accurate and relevant to our claim there. A, most of the farmers who mainly cultivated cereals and most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables In South Ondo were women. So in South Ondo, mainly non-root vegetables, that's true, but not cereals. Cereals were only 36% women. So mainly cultivated, most is greater than 50%. Okay, so that's not correct. It's not accurate to the table or the chart. B, more women in Central Ondo mainly cultivated root crops than mainly cultivated cereals. Okay, that's, it might be true, but that's just not relevant to our claim. I'm not even going to check the chart for that. Most of the farmers who mainly cultivated non-root vegetables in North and South Ondo were women. I think is it. That's what we said, right? North and South are dark bars, non-root vegetables of 50%. That's going to be our answer. That is clearly it. I'm not even going to check. Well, let's check D. A relatively equal portion of women across the entire regions mainly cultivated cereals. No, that's not correct and not relevant. So that is our answer, C. Okay, I've got another bar chart with 3 different columns. And this is going to be economic policy uncertainty in the UK. Uncertainty, so bigger values are more uncertain and it's over time. We've got different sort of groups here. That's tax and public spending policy, trade policy, and general economic policy. This is going to be logically completes the text. So let's figure out what exactly is going on and what we can conclude from the passage. High levels of public uncertainty about which economic policies a country will adopt can make planning difficult for businesses, but measures of such uncertainty have not tended to be very detailed. Okay. Recently, however, economist so-and-so analyzed trends in news reports to derive measures not only for general economic policy, that was one of our legend groups, uncertainty, but also for uncertainty related to specific areas of economic policy like tax or trade. Those are our other 2 legend groups. So these are specific, and this is the general. One revelation of her work is that a general measure may not fully reflect uncertainty about specific areas. So they're not necessarily going to say the same thing or tell the same story. As in the case of the UK, where general economics policy uncertainty, well, where are they not telling the same story? They're not too far off everywhere in between, but in 2005, they tell a different story. Specific is much higher than the general. And in 2010, a specific is much higher than the general. So that's where they seem to differ the most. So it doesn't always tell the same story, but it does in many years tell the same story. Okay, let's see what the answer choices are. A, general economic policy uncertainty aligned closely with uncertainty about tax and public spending in 2005. No, it didn't. It's just, and that wouldn't support our case if it did. General aligned with tax and public. Well, it kind of did, right? It's these 2 that align, but that doesn't tell our story that they don't always agree. So this is true, but I think it's going to be not relevant. But differed from uncertainty about tax and public spending policy by a large amount in 2009. Okay. They did not differ by a large amount in 2009. We can see they're about the same in 2009. So one part's not relevant. The other part is simply not accurate or not true to the graph. Okay, A is wrong. B, was general economic policy uncertainty was substantially lower than uncertainty about tax and public spending policy each year from 2005 to 2010. No. Substantially lower? No, they were pretty close. And no, it's not lower. In 2007, for example, it's higher than the other 2. So this is not true to the graph. Not true. Not accurate. Okay. C, general economic policy uncertainty reached its highest level between 2005 and 2010 in the same year that uncertainty about trade and tax spending reached their lowest levels. So that would show a divergence. So did general reach its highest levels in 2005 and 2010? General's the dark bar. And it does reach its highest levels. That's true in those 2 years. And tax and public spending policy so both of those reached their lowest levels. Well, that's not true because one of them each reached their highest levels respectively in the different years. So I think that's just, this last part is not true or accurate to the graph. D, general economic policy uncertainty was substantially lower than uncertainty about trade policy in 2005. Yeah, I think that's it. That's the one. Trade policy is the lightest bar. It's substantially lower. And it's going to say it's substantially lower than our tax and public spending policy in 2010, if that's the right answer. And yes, substantially higher than uncertainty about trade policy in 2010. Okay, so they're still comparing it to the light bar trade policy. And it is substantially higher there. So this is true. It's accurate to the graph, and it's relevant to answering our question. D is the right answer.